Where do things, though, go from here? Let's talk to MPs about that. Mark Gerritsen is the House Leader's Parliamentary Secretary, and Conservative Public Safety critic Raquel Dancho is here as well. Hello to both of you. Thank you very much for making the time. Mr. Gerritsen, my understanding is that the committee that you both sat on today has voted in favor of the NDP's motion to call for a public inquiry that spans the scope of all potential foreign election interference. Will your government support that? Is your government prepared to support that?
Well, I mean, we'll see what comes out after the committee reports back to the House, which it hasn't done yet. But I would say that, although foreign interference is something that we seem to be talking about now, and the media is talking a lot about it, this is something that the government has been seized with since 2015. We've introduced a number of measures, knowing that foreign interference happens in Canada and around the world. It's a question of how we're going to respond to it. So by setting up things like the special panel that is activated during a writ period that has the authority to oversee and to act on foreign interference. That's one tool that the government put in place. We put in place NSICOP, which is the National Security Advisory Committee of parliamentarians that has the ability to look at what would otherwise to committees be classified information, to have that oversight themselves. So this government has been seized with it for 7+ years. It's nothing new, I guess is what I should say.
Nothing new for you, perhaps. But, and I take your point that your government has done stuff to combat it and to determine if it affects our elections. But despite all of that, because of the allegations that have surfaced in the public, there are genuine concerns among Canadians about the potential. In fact, Angus Reid polling points out that 53% of Canadians right now are worried about the potential impact on our democracy.
Yep.
Instead of continually kind of dismissing those concerns because you've done other stuff, why not just say, okay, if it will help people believe in the integrity of our system, let's just do an inquiry?
Well, listen, to start with, I mean, yes, we've been doing that stuff, but this is not to say that we're dismissing concerns. We fully, are seized with the concerns that are out there.
But you refuse to do more than you're doing right now.
But you heard the commissioner say at committee today, a number of experts and witnesses that came forward. In your opening clip, you had the RCMP saying there was nothing that constituted further investigation into this. So I think that it's pretty clear in terms of that the last election was decided by Canadians and Canadians only. There wasn't any threat that was deemed to be actionable, and that the process that we have in place worked. Does that mean that the government doesn't want to look at how we can do better and what more we can do? Sure, but the question is, are we doing it in the right venue? This is why I brought up those two other venues that we already have in place earlier. We have venues in place to properly study and analyze in an environment where we can respect the confidentiality of the information that we have to look at. And so this is what it really comes down to, is that do we do this in a venue that won't give that access, or do we do it in a venue that is actually designed to do this?
Ms. Dancho, we heard today from the head of CSIS, Canada's spy agency, who said, and I'll circle back to some of Mr. Gerritsen's points in a second, but we heard from David Vigneault, who confirmed essentially what the site panel had asserted in 2019 and 2021, that the outcome of the election was not impacted. If the head of Canada's spy agency is saying that, and of course it's their intelligence that we are all reacting to through the Globe and Mail's reporting, then why would an inquiry still be necessary?
I think certainly we saw from the leaked CSIS documents that was reported by the Globe and Mail a few weeks ago that there were significant impacts on several seats held by Conservatives that were then lost to Liberal candidates. And so I think it's important that the public be made aware of the details of those allegations and the impact that they had on Conservative seats. Again, the CSIS report said that there was a strategic effort by Beijing to support a Liberal minority win and a defeat of Conservative candidates. Quite a serious report out of CSIS, and to see Liberals continuing to downplay the severity of this, and they point to a committee or a report that they struck. Well, we know that the report was headed up by the former president of the Trudeau Foundation when they received hundreds of thousands of dollars from Beijing. So far, what they've done has not resulted in any safeguard of those MPs who lost their seats as a result, at least in part, to Beijing election interference, pardon me. And I think what we're looking to see as Conservatives is a committee that is robust, that brings forward all the Prime Minister's staff who had those briefings with CSIS, who were informed that this election interference was serious and took no measure to defend our democracy in the 2021 election.
Okay,
and again, I'll just point out, as just one last point, if you'll allow me, the Conservative Party reached out to that task force that Mr. Gerritsen outlined, pleading for support as they saw these impacts happening on the ground in Conservative-held ridings. And that task force did nothing to support them. So they continue to point to a task force that has done nothing to support candidates who have been targeted by the Beijing regime and their strategic effort to ensure a Liberal win and a Conservative loss.
Okay, but the task force is different than the site panel that was set up, right? And the site panel was designed to make the determination about whether or not the integrity of the election was compromised. They made the determination that it was not. CSIS, the head of CSIS today echoed that determination. And I take your point about the seriousness of the allegations. Like I said to Mr. Gerritsen, I think Canadians are troubled to see that. I interviewed Kenny Chu, one of the Conservative candidates rather in question. We shared his concerns with Canadians, but ultimately what CSIS said today, what the head of CSIS said, was that the outcome was not impacted. So again, are you basing your claims here in fact?
I think certainly everyone agrees, all parties agree, that the ultimate outcome of the election was not impacted. But the information that we have is that several Conservative seats were lost to Liberals in part or in full as a result of Beijing's strategic interference in our last election. And so, Vassy, it may have been a handful of seats this time, but there are circumstances where a difference between a majority government and a minority government is about a handful of seats. So I think we need to see serious efforts by the Prime Minister and the Liberal government that they're taking this seriously. They stop downplaying and they take serious action. I'll outline that no one has been arrested for this. No one has been charged for this. And I asked the RCMP today, would there need to be legislative changes made so that charges could be laid? And he said that could be another tool in the toolbox, and yet we've seen no effort from the Prime Minister or the Minister of Public Safety to bring in criminal code changes so that the evidence that they've gathered and charges can be laid and pursued. And so I think that's concerning.
Okay,
we've also seen the same, if I could just end here, those 4 police stations that are operating illegally in Canada from Beijing that are used to terrorize Chinese Canadians for speaking up against the Beijing regime, no arrests have been made there. So how seriously is the Prime Minister taking this if no one has been held accountable for the police stations or for the election interference?
I take the point about accountability. I did hear the RCMP, though, say that they used overt operations in order to shut them down, but I do take your point on accountability. Mr. Gerritsen, look,
the operations have possibly ceased, yes.
If I take from what Ms. Dancho said, if the shoe was on the other foot, if, for example, there were 11 Liberals who lost because of potential or allegations of Chinese interference, would your party not want to see a full accounting of that?
But what Ms. Dancho said is not correct. She just said that a number of seats were lost to Conservatives as a result of foreign interference. No authority has actually confirmed that. As a matter of fact, in committee today and repeatedly in committee yesterday, the exact opposite has been said by CSIS, the RCMP, the Commissioner of Elections, the CEO of Elections Canada. Everybody's saying that the integrity of the election was upheld.
The election was free and fair.
Even you just said that the election was free and fair, and that the integrity was upheld.
I'm quoting the CSIS director,
Yeah.
but I think I agree that you can't know what nobody is saying those 11 ridings were decided. But we also have read Mr. Rosenberg's report, which said it is very difficult to ascertain that, to disaggregate all the factors, and that maybe he didn't say this, but I'm wondering as a result of that, would it not benefit Canadians and the Liberals and the Conservatives for everyone to be able to say, here's all the information we can share with you about this? Because regardless of your government pointing to the mechanisms that exist already, there was a lot of stuff we didn't hear today. A lot of people saying we can't say that.
But you didn't hear it today for the same reasons that you won't hear it in a public inquiry, because a lot of the information is kept in a confidential manner that is subject to certain classifications to be able to analyze the information. information. So I guess my concern is that if we truly want this to be a nonpartisan exercise, and I believe that we do because this is something that is the foundations of our democracy, then we have to look at it through a nonpartisan lens, and we shouldn't be trying to take cheap shots politically on this. What we should be doing is saying, what's the best way, based on the expert advice, to go about analyzing the information and bringing it to
if a judge-led inquiry is it, will you do that? If
a
judge-led public inquiry is it, will you do that?
If experts said that, but all the experts are saying that it's not, that you're not going to get any more information in a public inquiry than you would get in the committee today, and that's what we've heard. That's what we've continually seen.
I have like 30 seconds left. I'm already really going long, Ms. Dancho. I want to give you a chance to have a final word, if you don't mind. On that point, look, it is true. We did hear from Jody Thomas. She's not going to be able to say more in a public inquiry than she would here. It sounds like the preference for a venue would be that committee made up of MPs who are kind of sworn to secrecy, who have a higher level of access to classified information. Would your party be open to an inquiry happening there?
No, I think we need to have sunlight on this. Canadians deserve to know the truth about this. And ultimately, our hard line as Conservatives is that any lead of the Commission needs to be agreed to in all parties. No longer can we have Liberal insiders who were heading up the Trudeau Foundation when they received hundreds of thousands of dollars from Beijing. That we need to have an independent, nonpartisan lead of that. And yet we're not seeing agreement from the Liberals or the NDP who are supporting them in this. Also, I will say, Vash, just to conclude, that an inquiry could take years for Canadians to get answers. We need answers today as well. And that's why Conservatives are pushing so hard at committee to ensure that all Prime Minister's office staff that were in briefings with CSIS and others be brought to committee to answer to Canadians what they heard, when they learned, and why they didn't act on it. And I will say, just to conclude, that the Prime Minister has repeatedly said he was never briefed by this, and yet we see now Jody Thomas, who you mentioned just yesterday, saying, no, he was briefed on several occasions. So we certainly need better accountability from Justin Trudeau and the Liberal government, and we do believe that includes his head staff. And I will just mention that the Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister has been a central authority in campaigns since 2015. She needs to come and answer to Canadians what she knows.
Okay, I'll leave it there. I do appreciate both of you making the time for this discussion, Raquel Dancho and Mark Gerritsen.